Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. This is Muhammad Latif and this is the summary of today's lesson. Today we started Unit 2, Lesson 4, English Student Book, page number 26. And the topic of the lesson was planning a story. Before we started the lesson, I shared the learning objectives of today's lesson with the class. I'm going to include it right now also in the summary video, Planning a Story, page number 26, Unit 2. And lesson objectives are speaking, talk about writing stories, reading, read a story, and writing, plan and write a short story. In critical thinking, we discussed how to create a story and looking at the different part of a story and the use of sequencing words. Then, in language focus, we discussed punctuation before reporting verbs. Then, in vocabulary, we discussed the sequencing words like after, the next day, at last, finally, one day. And in reporting verbs, we discussed gasps, whisper, exclaimed, and smiled. So, after the discussion on learning objectives, I asked the question to the class, the opening question of the story. Read the story quickly. What does Ben like doing? Does he win? So that was the opening question. And I also asked to the students about the meaning of story and what type of story they like to read. So the students participated in the discussion, and after that, as a whole class, we read the story on page number 26 and we discussed the difficult words. And after that, we answered the question 1. After the discussion, I also discussed and displayed the answer of question 1. And the answer is he likes doing judo. And the answer of the question, like, does he win? So the answer is yes, he won. After that, we started question number 2. And the question number 2 is read the story again and answer these questions. So we read the story again and then I asked exercise 2 questions one by one to the class and students answered the questions like where is the story set, who are the characters in the story, what problems does Ben have, and how does he solve the problems. And question 5, what happens in the end. So as I mentioned earlier that I asked these questions to the class and students answered these questions accordingly. And then after verbally discussion, we solve answer 2, and these are the answers of question 1 to 5, exercise 2. After that, we move to the next question. The next question is word study, sequencing words. Sequence means uh, the order in which we discuss the different events in the story. So the question was, look at the blue words below, find other words in the text that tell you when something happened. So as I mentioned earlier, in story writing, if we are writing any event or story, usually we write it in the correct order, like we follow the orders in which events occurs or happen. So we follow the words, we follow the sequence, and we use the words like at first, after that, or after, then the next day, then after that, or at last. So we use these types of words, and then I gave a task to the class to identify all these types of words that describe sequence in the given story. And students identified those words, and then after that I displayed the answer like I'm doing right now. So these are the other examples of sequencing words like one day, just as, then, suddenly, finally, and now. So these are the sequencing words that we can find in our given story. After that, we discussed the question number 4, make a story. And I asked the students to follow these instructions, and then they can write their own short story on any of the favorite topic. Like look at these sentences and add the correct punctuation. So you did really well, he said. So this is basically a reported speech, direct and indirect sentences. So we discussed with the class how to add the punctuation marks in reported speech. And then I also displayed the answer how to discuss the reported speech punctuation marks. So we mark the punctuation mark, okay, uh, in the speech for before the speech and after the speech, and then we write the reported verb after or before the reported speech. Like you did really well, this is the actual, these are the actual words of the speaker. And then he said, he is the speaker, and said is the reported verb. Same like that, here's your trophy, this is the actual sentence, and she is the reported subject, or the person who said this sentence, and then smiled is the reported verb. So same like that, we discussed how to write reported speech, and also we discussed the reported sentences and how to mark the punctuation marks to the reported speech. Then question number 5 is about, think about ideas for your own story. Make notes under these headings and then write your story. So we discussed this topic also, and as I've mentioned earlier, I asked the students to think about writing their own short story, and then I asked them to include these headings, like these are the different parts of the story writing, like where is it set, the ground of the story, the plot of the story. Like if they are talking the about the football match, okay, so they have to write where is it set, in the school or in the football ground or in the sports center. Then who are the characters, the name of the characters that they want to mention, like they can mention their own name, or someone someone's name, like their friend or the participants in that match. And then what problems do they have, then they discuss like what type of problem they face during that match, and then how do they solve the problem and what was the result. So these are the important points that I've mentioned and discussed during the lesson, and I encourage the students to also include these different parts in the story writing. So after that we wind up the lesson. So that's all for today's lesson. Thank you so much for your time. Take care and Allah Hafiz.